How do you think the deck will do without Mermaid? Still playable? Any thoughts on how the deck will work if Knightmare Mermaid gets banned? Ayo, does Lunalight Run Orcust post probable Mermaid ban? Hey man, since a new ban list is coming and Mermaid might get Mermaid gets the ban, will you still play Lunalight? Hey Emanon, drop that Mermaid ban. What to do video ASAP play deck? I wonder what you'll do when Mermaid gets banned. If Emanon had $1 for every time he got asked this question, well Aberdeen, I'd have $7, because that was 7 questions. But still more than that YouTube money, hey, am I right? Anyways, let's talk about Mermaid. Hey, what's up guys, Sir Emanon here, back with another discussion video on how I feel the upcoming October 2019 ban list would impact the Lunalight Orcust strategy in general. Now, this is going to be specifically pertaining to this deck, but I want to say that later on this week, I will have another video discussing the overarching changes that I feel will happen on the ban list, as well as the metagame shifts and how I feel the game will shape up as a result. But for now, we're just going to own in on specifically the Lunalight Orcust deck and how I feel that the potential impending Knightmare Mermaid ban, as well as potentially any other hits, could affect this deck as a whole. So without any further ado, let's just go ahead and dive on in. Alright, so some of the potential hits that I feel will be upcoming, especially in regards to the Lunalight deck, are going to be pretty obvious. So the first is the most widely discussed, and that is Knightmare Mermaid going to 0. Now, I feel that this is going to be the most impactful hit because it cuts off all other decks that are utilizing the Orcust engine from actually being able to access the lineup. And in general, this card is very problematic as far as being banned for the Lunalight deck, simply because it was so useful for discarding cards like Dangers or Zephyros or Serenade Dance. So this is going to be the main issue that I'm going to be discussing in the bulk of the video. The next is going to be Orcust Knightmare to 0, which I've seen as an alternative to Knightmare Mermaid. Some have argued that if you leave Mermaid unbanned, but actually ban the Orcust Knightmare instead, that makes it so that you still have the versatility of Mermaid summoning out other targets, but the Orcust Knightmare is still what leads into the Orcust engine in general. So if you hit Orcust Knightmare, then some people have argued that that means that basically, you know, it does the same thing as far as shutting off people from just splashing Mermaid into their deck and having the Orcusts to be able to play with. But at the same time, it still doesn't hinder the pure Orcust deck either, and it allows you to be able to use Mermaid for other purposes. The third hit that I've seen proposed and discussed is Harp Horror going to 0. So this is a bit of a more interesting one because I feel like it actually impacts the pure Orcust deck more than the other 2 hits. A lot more actually, because Harp Horror is a card that really allows the deck to have more board presence and really just spam the field with more monsters and be able to just continually recycle through resources. So if this card actually gets banned, then it would hurt quite significantly actually. So I don't think that they would hit this and not one of the other 2, but it is still a consideration to definitely make. Now, as far as potential other hits, I'm not really sure what else would be hit as far as specific things pertaining to Lunalight Orcust apart from these 3. But the other thing that maybe could happen is the Lunalight cards themselves being hit, which I will definitely delve into later on towards the end of this video. But yeah, these are going to be the more proposed hits, and we'll get into what we can do to actually play around with the possibility of Mermaid getting banned as well as the others. Alright, so the big problem and issue to discuss is the Mermaid ban and what exactly we need to do with ourselves. So I've actually come up with 5 different solutions. Yes, 5 different potential solutions that we can come up with to actually alleviate and play around the fact that Mermaid will no longer be with us. Most likely at least. So the first is going to be, of course, depending on the other hits to the format, we can simply go into a Curious the Lightsworn Dominion and send Orcusts that way. That way we can still run the Orcust lineup as a whole. So for example, if we have the access to Orcust Knightmare as well as Orcust Harp Horror, we can simply just send one of those off the Curious and continue to combo off as normally. This could, of course, be very beneficial for sending these 2 cards, as it really just allows us to continue with the combo as if nothing had really happened, as all you really need is just an extra monster to continue to go into the second Galatea, use Symbol to revive the first one, and do the whole play that we are currently doing. But this can be achieved through a myriad of different ways. Of course, dangers are still going to be present with us. I don't really foresee these cards getting hit further. I think Konami did actually a very, very good job semi-limiting these cards. I think a lot of people have complained less, generally speaking, about their presence in the overall game. It's a lot more fair, I feel, and I think the dangers are actually definitely in a good spot right now. So definitely these cards are going to be appropriate extenders and viable options, as they have been for a while now. Other options are going to be, of course, things like Destrudo, the Lost Dragon's Prison, and the Phantom Knights of Shea Brigandine, just extra cards that give board presence for dark monsters of different types. That way you can just go into Curious as quickly as possible. You also have the Niarla Azathoth line, which gives you a free Dark Fiend, which is really, really cool. There's cards, you know, like the Time Thief package, like Defrag Dragon, Instant Fusion, all these other options that you can utilize to make Curious very, very easily. And that way you can still proceed with your normal Orcust plays. The second thing I have listed here is going for a more stable build, and what I mean by this is just generally setting up not maybe the most powerful board, but enough versatility in the extra deck as far as the rank 4s are concerned. That way you can go ahead, survive a turn, and then go in for the OTK later and potentially grind back and forth. And the deck would have a natural capability of going second as well, with the cards in the deck that are naturally available to us. So cards like Evil Swarm Nightmare, Tornado Dragon, Abyss Dweller, and even Baguska. These cards are all actually really, really good options to go into going first that can help hinder your opponent's plays to a certain degree. You can even fit in some other non-engine cards like Hand Traps, just to help combat your opponent with whatever they happen to be doing. Then with cards that are good going second, such as Firefighting Darumidal and Tiger King, you can just go ahead and easily push, as well as the Nightmares, of course, going second to be able to effectively break your opponent's board and maybe set up further or go for the OTK in certain scenarios. The third idea that I have is to adapt towards a go second list, but one that includes a lot of the board breakers. So basically a lot of the cards that current go second pure Orcust is playing, things like Mind Control, things like Shaddoll Fusion, even like Nibiru or Kaijus or Pankratops, all these other cards that have just amazing utility going second. You can opt in for a blind second list that opts to try and simplify the game state as much as possible, trying to go for one-for-one trades with these cards, and then go for a Chick Tiger setup and potentially try an OTK from there. The next thing that I have listed is to go try and all in for the pure build. Yep, we're gonna go back to old school potentially and try and set up good old Leo Dancer and really just try and use all of our engine cards to just pick apart our opponent's board and OTK as fast and as quickly as possible. So essentially we would just not be trying to run too many non-engine cards, maybe a couple hand traps here and there, but overall just trying to chew through our opponent's disruptions and then go and set up a OTK with good old Leo Dancer. And the fifth and final option that I have is just to try and be more creative with combo builds. So I've actually been working on a Pendulum Lunalight build that those of you guys who are in my Discord already know. If you haven't joined my Discord server, would highly encourage you to do so. The link is in the description, of course. But yes, there are definitely alternatives to combo variants, and you might just have to shift around things entirely. For example, the popular build for Lunalights prior to the Rusty ban was just simply using, you know, the Phantom Knights as well as any other Dark Extenders. Orcusts were seldom run in that deck, and really the deck just tried to utilize Dark Monsters as much as we can. The natural direction of the deck might not be Pendulums, but you have to consider that there are other options out there. For example, Guard Dragons, although I'm kind of assuming that they might be hit too. So generally speaking, just try and open your mind and see what crazy ideas that you can come up with. Don't let anyone tell you that any idea is bad. It all has to start somewhere. And so if you feel like you have grounds or I guess, you know, weight to your ideas, then definitely try them out and see if you can come up with anything really creative and really cool. But yeah, that's going to be the 5 ideas that I have listed, and we're going to move on into some other points that I have to talk about. So I feel the next natural direction of discussion is to talk about how potentially the deck can perform with other Orcusts being hit, specifically Knightmare and Harp Horror potentially going to 0. So this would imply one of two scenarios based on whether or not Mermaid gets banned. So if Mermaid first off is not banned, but for example Orcust Knightmare is, then we can actually take advantage of the other targets that Knightmare Mermaid can summon, and the fact that Mermaid is just generally a very fantastic outlet for cards such as Zephyros, Dangers, or Lunalight's Serenade Dance, which is primarily one of the reasons why it's so powerful and synergistic. So the first option we have is Knightmare Corruptor Ibli. This card, as we all know currently, plays around Nibiru. It helps you to basically stop your opponent from just building up their board for free, albeit it's weaker without an extra link. But if Mermaid is less popular because of the banning of Orcust Knightmare, for example, that means you won't really have to worry too much about your opponent just using their Ibli to summon their own Mermaid, which I feel is very advantageous. So it makes Ibli a very solid inclusion. Another option is Astro Nightmare, Nightmare Incarnation Ibli. I keep calling it Astro in my mind because that's the fan translation. But this card is a fairy that you can use to make Curious the Lightsworn Dominion. It's a little bit harder to use with Ibli since Ibli locks you into Link monsters, so you'd have to have your setup required prior to that. But Ibli doesn't block you under any such restrictions, so you can actually just utilize it as a material for Curious. It also is a level 9 monster, so you can potentially overlay it with Lunalight Saber Dancer to go into something like True King of All Calamities. And the really cool thing about Ibli is that actually it is technically an outgoing second. You can go Mermaid Summon Ibli. If your opponent has a big Link board, you can send all the Link monsters on the field to the graveyard. So it's really good for potentially clearing boards, just as a side note and something to consider. The other scenario, of course, is that if Mermaid is banned, then we simply just default to the other options that I had on the previous screen, just of course discounting the fact that Curious sending Orcust is not going to be a possibility. But yep, the Orcust hits if Mermaid isn't banned would actually be very interesting. It would imply that we have other options and ways to get Zephyros out of our hand, which is really convenient for being able to set up and still be able to play, similarly to how we are currently. So now here's the fun part that I think a lot of you guys maybe are anticipating, and that is some sample deck lists. So I actually have one for each of the 5 ideas that I presented earlier. Now keep in mind that these are admittedly kind of thrown together and by no means perfect deck lists by any stretch of the imagination, but these are kind of some ideas to help you sort of, understand what I'm talking about as far as the general concepts behind what I feel the approaches are. So the first I mentioned was Curious Turbo into Orcust, so here's a list right here for that. You can see that I am running all of the extenders that I mentioned, Destrudo, Time Thieves, I'm running Shea Brigandine. There's a lot of cool combos actually if you open Chick Tiger and Time Thief Winder that I might actually get into. But yeah, this essentially is going to be setting up your Curious as fast as you can, as well as, of course, setting your Orcusts to be able to continue to play as we are currently. Admittedly, the Chick Tiger combo can actually get into Curious, but it only ends in the Dingirsu Galatea Crescendo, which I'm not a big fan of, so I actually don't know if this is going to be the build that I end up going with in the future, but it is definitely something to keep in mind and definitely something to consider. The second list that I was talking about was a more sort of grindy rank 4 toolbox version that had very good flexibility going first and second, and I'll put that on the screen right here for you guys. So this is looking pretty similar to the first build, of course, but just with the exclusion of the Orcust cards. So basically what you're going to be trying to do here is utilize Curious just to be able to send the cards that you need, since of course we can't pitch off Mermaid anymore, so you can use Curious to send things like Zephyros if you, for example, don't have a way to discard it via Perfume or Serenade Dance. You can also use Curious to send things like Imperial Order or other floodgates as we are currently, and then just set up a variety of rank 4 plays and then go into potentially a Leo Dancer or a Borisword for an OTK the following turn. The third idea that we had here was a board breaker style bind second list with a lot of just 1-for-1 traders, so you can go and freely do your combo and try an OTK from there. So here's this list right now. You'll notice that the Shaddoll Fusion is a very nice inclusion in this deck, simply because it helps you just generate so many cards, and it allows you to essentially just try and amass enough resources And a lot of these cards are like must negate cards, so things like Cosmic Foresight, like Salamangreat counter traps. Like you can use Mind Control as well. Pankratops is a very solid out to things. So like you just have a lot of very solid options going second, and this is just a general idea. You can put in a lot more cards that are just good board breakers going second, but this is just a general idea of what you guys can expect to see if you decide to run with this. The fourth thing that I had was just the pure Lunalight build going second. So of course this isn't going to be like as old school as maybe traditional Lunalight builds, but you know, it's pretty much just all engine cards. You're just trying to break your opponent's board and see how far you can get going second, going for the OTK as quickly as you can. And then the final thing was the Pendulum Lunalight build that I was actually working on, and it's funnily enough not as bad as I thought it would be. I thought it would just be I guess a gimmick, but it actually has some good merits behind it. And if you guys want to see me do some test hands with this deck, I'd be more than happy to do so. But here's the list right here, and it's organized a little bit differently simply because I have the Lunalight cards separated from the Pendulum cards. But yeah, the deck actually can just put up some really nasty boards. And it really plays on Nibiru super well, because not only do you have Azathoth, but now you have Servant too, so you just have insane amounts of ways to just be able to play through certain disruptions. And of course this list isn't, I want to reiterate, these lists aren't perfect, nor are these the final drafts, but I just want to say that this is like a very interesting template that you guys might want to toy around with if you're interested in playing a very explosive list. But yeah, this is basically the ideas that I have for you guys if you want to see them visually. And finally, I'm just going to go talk a bit more freeform. I don't really have anything outlined here for the Lunalight hits, but I'm just going to put the cards on screen and just share my personal thoughts. And I'm not actually going to be doing a second or third take if I mess up, unlike what I did with the other time. So you're going to get my complete analysis just off the top of my head, and I'm not going to be scripting any of this out. I just left the images for me to kind of go off of when I want to talk about each of the cards. So the first is Lunalight Tiger, which I actually feel is the most susceptible to being hit. It's the card that we abuse the most, and it's the card that honestly, if other archetypes had, you know, people would be clamoring for those cards to be hit. Now, my general attitude towards Lunalight hits is that honestly, if they hit the Orcust cards, I don't really feel they need to hit the Lunalight cards. That's of course my biased opinion as a Lunalight player, but I understand that with the success of the deck as of late, and Lunalight proving itself to be the more dominant engine that can utilize Orcusts, there is merit to the cards themselves to be hit. So let's talk about Tiger for a second here. So Tiger, I feel, actually has a very strong chance of going to 1, simply because, again, I feel that it's the card that can be the most abusable, with the fact that, of course, it isn't once per turn. The fact that, you know, we have so many ways of recycling it and popping it ourselves and just doing so many crazy things with it. I will be sad to see it go, but I actually do believe that it will be going to 1 of the next list. So things we can do to mitigate it, not really a whole lot as far as like reversal or, you know, anything like that. We'll still have potentially, you know, 3 goods, 3 perfume tanky, but of course those cards are also potential you know, culprits, as I'll get to later. But assuming that this is the only hit, it is recoverable, and you could just make use out of cards like Black Sheep to, you know, potentially get it back if like it gets destroyed. You can like send off Kaleido Chick, because Kaleido Chick doesn't specify a face down extra deck. You can actually send Tigers from your face up extra deck with Kaleido Chick, then get it back off like Black Sheep. If it gets banished off Cosmic Cyclone or something, you can use Emerald Bird to get it back. There are ways around just playing with 1 Tiger, but it definitely, you know, becomes a lot worse if we only have access to 1. But I do feel that that is going to be the impending hit that you guys have to be prepared for. I don't want it to be hit. I don't think it's necessary. I do think that if the Orcusts are hit, then it curbs the power level of this deck from the mainstream level of competition quite significantly. But if Konami feels it is necessary, then we do have to be prepared for it, and I am not going to be giving up on the deck just because of 1 hit. The next thing is Tenki, which I alluded to earlier. I don't think this actually will be hit, simply because the new Senka archetype actually is all Beast Warriors. So it's actually quite unlikely that this gets hit, not to mention that we just got a bunch of new Fire Fist support. But if they wanted to curb consistency, I suppose they could hit this, but again, I think it's actually pretty unlikely. The next candidate is Lunalight Kaleidochick, which I actually don't think will really be hit too much. Like, yeah, you can hit Kaleidochick, and yeah, it's an important piece, but I mean, honestly, it's not really as crippling as Tiger. There's a lot more ways to get access to Kaleidochick than there are to get access to Tiger, so I really think it would be more manageable if Kaleidochick went to 1 versus if like Tiger went to 1. Don't get me wrong, it is going to suck, you know, getting a lot of the setup tools, and you know, Tiger Perfume is one of those hands where you already are like, well, this hand doesn't really do anything. But I do think there's a lot more workarounds to Kaleidochick being hit as opposed to Tiger, so if this card gets hit, we will definitely be able to survive, absolutely, for sure. I think the biggest hurdle would be Tiger going to 1. That's why I mentioned it first. And then the final card that's on the chopping block potentially is Lunalight Perfume. So this card, you know, having two very powerful effects, neither of which are once per turn, obviously makes it, you know, very eye-catching for a lot of players. And I actually think that this card, if it does get hit, it would be unfortunate, but it's actually not the end of the world. It would make Goods a lot weaker of a card, so like that definitely is something to consider. But if this card theoretically went to 1, then I think that, you know, we just play the 1 copy, see how it goes, and you know, try and make consistency still as good as we can. Probably drop Goods to 2 so we can, you know, still have the flexibility of sending it, as well as, you know, the Serenade if we need. But yeah, I don't think any of the Lunalight cards would ever deserve to be banned. If they do, then I would actually be surprised. If they ban Tiger, that would be kind of a problem, and we would have to really reassess how the deck performs if that happens. But I can foresee any of these cards potentially going to 1, and if any single one of these cards go to 1, but not like any combination of them, just like handpick one out of the 4 to go to 1, then I think it's manageable. If multiple of them go to 1, that's a bit of a different story, and we'll just have to see. But we'll have to see regardless, because we have no idea what Konami is going to do, and ultimately it'll be up to us to see how well we can recover, but I definitely think it's possible. So yeah, that's going to be it for this video, this discussion video on how I feel the Lunalight Orcust deck will be shifted and changed as a result of the upcoming 2019 October ban list. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope you did enjoy. Definitely be sure to leave a like if you did, as well as any thoughts or feedback down in the comment section down below. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more informative and competitive Yu-Gi-Oh content. If you want to, you can follow me on Discord, Twitter, or Twitch. All 3 links are going to be in the description as always. And once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will catch you in the next video. See you guys!